His throne was her undoing. Bianca Marchesi had spent 10 years as a mafia wife. And when her husband was killed, she did not mourn she planned. But the men who sat in darkened rooms, who whispered about power and succession, had already made their decision. She was nothing but a relic, a woman left behind, all except for him, the one who had once stood beside her husband, the one who now leaned in close and murmured, "Tell me, Bella mia, do you want to grieve him? Or do you want to win?" Chapter 1. The silence after the storm. The rain fell in sheets, mirroring the relentless torrent of grief that should have been consuming Bianca Marchesi. But her eyes remained dry, her heart a cold, still chamber within her chest. 10 years. 10 years she had played the role of the dutiful wife, the silent ornament to Marco Marchesi's ambition. 10 years she had buried her own desires, her own spirit, beneath the weight of his expectations and the suffocating demands of the famiglia. Now, the Grand Palazzo, once a symbol of their supposed power, felt like a gilded cage, the silence after the storm of his death more deafening than any argument they'd ever had. Marco's funeral had been a spectacle, a performance of grief orchestrated by men in dark suits, their faces etched with a mixture of genuine sorrow and calculated ambition. The Donati family, their closest allies and fiercest rivals, had sent their condolences, their eyes lingering on Bianca with a mixture of pity and something that made her skin crawl. She'd seen that look before, the predatory glint in the eyes of men who saw weakness, opportunity. She'd been a pawn in their games for a decade. She refused to be a victim now. The scent of lilies, heavy and cloying, still clung to the air, a constant reminder of the elaborate charade that had just concluded. Bianca wandered through the vast, echoing rooms, her footsteps silent on the marble floors. The palazzo, nestled in the heart of Naples, had been in the Marchesi family for generations. Its walls had witnessed countless betrayals, whispered secrets, and the rise and fall of empires built on blood and loyalty. Now, it felt like a mausoleum, a monument to a life she no longer recognized. She stopped before a portrait of Marco, a grand, imposing painting that captured his arrogance, his ruthless charm, his undeniable power. He looked every bit the Don he had been, his dark eyes gleaming with a fierce intensity that had once captivated her, then terrified her, and finally bored her. She felt nothing. Not sadness, not anger, not even relief. Just a hollow emptiness that echoed the vastness of the room around her. A delicate china cup, a relic from her grandmother, sat on a nearby table, its floral pattern a stark contrast to the heavy, masculine decor of the room. Bianca picked it up, tracing the delicate curves with her fingertip. It was a fragile thing, a reminder of a life before the Marchesi family, a life filled with laughter, with dreams, with the promise of something more. A life she had willingly surrendered at the altar. The silence was broken by the soft click of the door opening. Antonio Salieri, Marco's consigliere, his right-hand man, the one who had always stood in the shadows, watching, listening, advising. He was a man of quiet intensity, his presence a constant, steady hum of controlled power. He was also, she realized with a sudden, sharp clarity, the only person in this entire charade who had ever truly seen her. He moved with a grace that belied his age, his dark eyes, framed by lines of experience and a hint of weariness, fixed on her. He didn't offer empty platitudes or hollow condolences. He simply stood there, acknowledging the weight of the moment, the unspoken truths that hung heavy in the air. "Signora Marchesi," he said, his voice a low, resonant rumble that somehow managed to soothe the raw edges of her nerves. He never called her Bianca. It was always Signora Marchesi, a formality that both acknowledged her position and subtly reminded her of the distance that still existed between them. "Antonio," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. She set the china cup down, the delicate clink a tiny act of defiance against the oppressive silence. He inclined his head slightly, a gesture of respect, but also, she sensed, a hint of something else. Understanding? Perhaps even sympathy? "The arrangements have been made," he said, his gaze flickering towards the portrait of Marco. The family expects a period of mourning, of course. But there are matters that require your attention. Matters. The delicate euphemism for the brutal power struggle that was already underway, the vultures circling, ready to pick apart Marco's empire. She knew what they expected of her, to fade into the background, a grieving widow, a silent figurehead, while they decided the future of the Marchesi family. Bianca looked at Antonio, her gaze unwavering. "And what do you expect, Antonio?" He met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of something akin to admiration. "I expect you to surprise them, Signora. I expect you to do what you have always done. Survive." His words were a challenge, a veiled offer of alliance, a spark of hope in the suffocating darkness. He knew the strength she had hidden, the resilience she had cultivated, the fire that had been banked for so long, waiting for the right moment to ignite. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "They underestimate you, Bianca. They see only the widow, the grieving wife. They do not see the woman who learned to navigate the treacherous currents of this family, who learned to read the unspoken language of power, who learned to survive." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Tell me, Bella Mia," he leaned in, his voice a whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "Do you want to grieve him? Or do you want to win?" The question hung in the air, a dangerous proposition, a forbidden alliance, a lifeline in a sea of despair. It was a question that demanded an answer that would determine not only her future, but the fate of the Marchesi legacy. The rain continued to lash against the windows, a relentless rhythm that echoed the sudden, fierce beating of her heart. She looked at Antonio, at the quiet strength in his eyes, at the unspoken promise of support, and for the first time in a decade, Bianca Marchesi felt a flicker of something other than emptiness. It was a spark of defiance, of determination, of hope. And it was terrifying. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Palazzo. The days following Marco's funeral were a blur of hushed conversations, veiled threats, and the constant, suffocating presence of famiglia. The Palazzo, once a symbol of power and prestige, now felt like a battleground, every whispered word, every lingering glance, a potential weapon. Bianca moved through it all with a newfound composure, a carefully constructed mask of grief that hid the simmering defiance beneath. She spent hours in the sprawling library, surrounded by leather-bound books and the scent of old paper and secrets. It was a sanctuary, a place where she could escape the prying eyes and the constant pressure to conform. She'd pore over old ledgers, family histories, anything that might give her an edge, a clue to navigating the treacherous waters of the Marchesi succession. Antonio, true to his word, became her shadow, her guide, her unlikely confidant. He was a master of strategy, a chess player in a game where the stakes were life and death. He explained the intricacies of the family's businesses, the complex web of alliances and rivalries, the unspoken rules that governed their world. He taught her how to read the silences, how to decipher the hidden meanings in seemingly innocuous conversations, how to identify the wolves in sheep's clothing. "The Donati family," he said one evening, as they sat in the dimly lit library, a single lamp casting long shadows across the room, "are your most immediate concern. They have always coveted Marco's territory, his influence. They will see his death as an opportunity to expand their power." Bianca nodded, her gaze fixed on the flickering flame of the lamp. "And they believe I will be easily managed." Antonio smiled, a rare, fleeting expression that revealed a hint of admiration. "They believe you are a woman weakened by grief, a woman who will gladly relinquish control. They underestimate you, Bianca. They do not know the fire that burns beneath the surface." Their conversations were often punctuated by long silences, filled with unspoken understanding, shared secrets, and a growing sense of trust. Bianca found herself drawn to Antonio's quiet strength, his unwavering loyalty, his subtle, almost imperceptible, protectiveness. He was a stark contrast to Marco, whose boisterous personality and overt displays of power had always left her feeling suffocated. Antonio was a man of substance, a man of quiet dignity, a man who saw her not as a possession, but as an equal. One afternoon, while exploring the dusty archives in the basement of the palazzo, Bianca stumbled upon a hidden compartment behind a bookshelf. Inside, she found a small, locked wooden box. Her heart pounded in her chest as she carefully examined it. It was old, intricately carved with the Marchesi crest, a snarling lion, a symbol of their power and ferocity. She knew, instinctively, that this box held secrets that could change everything. She brought the box to Antonio, her hands trembling slightly. He examined it with a practiced eye, his expression unreadable. "This is significant," he said, his voice low and serious. It belonged to Marco's grandfather, Don Alessandro Marchesi. He was a man of ruthless ambition. He built this family from nothing, forging alliances in blood and fire. He looked at Bianca, his eyes filled with a mixture of concern and anticipation. "Are you sure you want to open this, Bianca? Some secrets are best left buried." Bianca met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "I need to know everything, Antonio. I need to understand the past if I am to have any hope of controlling the future." He nodded, acknowledging the truth in her words. He produced a small, delicate key from his pocket, a key he had apparently been carrying for years, waiting for this very moment. The lock clicked open with a soft, almost mournful sound. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were a collection of letters, bound together with a faded ribbon. The handwriting was elegant, spidery, clearly belonging to Don Alessandro. Bianca carefully picked up the letters, her fingers brushing against the brittle paper. As she began to read, a chilling realization washed over her. The letters detailed a secret alliance, a pact forged in blood between Don Alessandro and a rival family, the Romanos, long thought to be extinct. A pact that involved a betrayal so profound, so shocking, that it threatened to unravel the very foundations of the Marchesi Empire. A gasp escaped her lips, a sound of disbelief and dawning horror. Antonio, who had been watching her intently, reached out and placed a comforting hand on her arm. His touch was warm, steady, a grounding presence in the face of the storm that was brewing within her. "What is it, Bianca?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. She looked at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a strange, exhilarating sense of power. This changes everything, Antonio. This changes everything." The letters slipped from her grasp, scattering on the floor like fallen leaves, each one a testament to a past that refused to stay buried. The whispers in the palazzo were about to become a roar. Chapter 3. A Pact Forged in Shadows. The revelation contained within Don Alessandro's letters sent shockwaves through Bianca's carefully constructed world. The Romano family, believed to have been wiped out decades ago in a brutal turf war orchestrated by Marco's father, were not only alive but had been secretly allied with the Marcheses all along. The alliance, however, was built on a foundation of treachery. Don Alessandro had promised the Romanos a significant share of the Marchesi Empire in exchange for their help in eliminating a common enemy, a rival Don who had threatened both families. But once the enemy was vanquished, Alessandro had betrayed his promise, orchestrating the massacre of the Romanos, or so everyone believed. The letters hinted at a survivor, a single heir to the Romano legacy, someone who had been living in the shadows, biding their time, waiting for the opportune moment to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. Bianca felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just about power, it was about revenge, a decades-old vendetta that threatened to consume everything she was fighting for. "We need to find out who this Romano heir is," Bianca said, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands. "And we need to do it before the Donatis or anyone else discovers this." Antonio nodded, his face grim. "This is a dangerous game, Bianca. If this information falls into the wrong hands, it could trigger a war that would make the previous conflicts pale in comparison." He began to outline a plan, a cautious, meticulously crafted strategy to uncover the truth without alerting their enemies. They would start by investigating the old Romano territories, searching for any surviving relatives, any whispers of the past that might lead them to the air. "We need someone we can trust," Antonio said, "someone who knows the streets, someone who can move in the shadows without attracting attention." He paused, considering his options. "There's a man, Riccardo the Shadow Bellini. He's a freelancer. He has a reputation for being discreet, efficient, and utterly ruthless. He owes me a favor." Bianca raised an eyebrow. "Ruthless?" Antonio met her gaze, a hint of warning in his eyes. "He's a dangerous man, Bianca. But he's also the best at what he does. And in this world, we need all the advantages we can get." The following days were a whirlwind of clandestine meetings, hushed conversations in dimly lit trattorias, and the constant, unsettling feeling of being watched. Riccardo Bellini lived up to his reputation. He was a man of few words, his face scarred and weathered, his eyes cold and calculating. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, a ghost in the labyrinthine streets of Naples. He agreed to help them for a price, of course. Money was a language everyone understood, regardless of loyalty or allegiance. Bellini began his investigation, disappearing into the underbelly of the city, following a trail of whispers and rumors that led him to the forgotten corners of Naples. Meanwhile, Bianca continued to play the role of the grieving widow, attending meetings with the family elders, listening to their condescending advice, and subtly, almost imperceptibly, asserting her own authority. She used her knowledge of the family's businesses, gleaned from Antonio's tutelage and her own meticulous research, to challenge their assumptions, to question their decisions, to plant seeds of doubt in their minds. She discovered that Marco had been involved in a number of questionable deals, shady ventures that had lined his pockets, but had also made him numerous enemies. She realized that she was not only fighting for her own survival, but also for the soul of the Marchesi family. She had to decide what kind of legacy she wanted to leave behind, a legacy of blood and betrayal, or a legacy of something else. Something better. One evening, as Bianca and Antonio were poring over old maps and documents in the library, Bellini arrived, his presence announced by a subtle shift in the air, a barely perceptible shadow at the door. He stood before them, his expression unreadable. "I found something," he said, his voice a low growl. "A name. A location." He handed Bianca a small, crumpled piece of paper. On it, written in a hurried scrawl, was a single name, Sofia Romano, and an address, a small, unassuming apartment in a quiet, residential neighborhood on the outskirts of Naples. Bianca felt her heart skip a beat.
Sofia Romano, the heir.
The ghost. The woman who held the key to the past, and perhaps the future. The name echoed in her mind, a whisper of danger, a promise of confrontation. The pact forged in shadows was about to be brought into the light. Chapter 4. The Weight of Unspoken Truths. The address Riccardo Bellini provided led Bianca and Antonio to a quiet, tree-lined street far removed from the opulent grandeur of the Marchesi Palazzo. The building was modest, unremarkable, a place where someone could easily blend in, disappear. It was the perfect hiding place for someone who wanted to remain unseen. Bianca felt a knot of apprehension tighten in her stomach. This was it, the moment of truth. She was about to confront the ghost of the past, the woman who could either destroy her or become her most unexpected ally. "Are you ready for this, Bianca?" Antonio asked, his voice low and serious. He stood beside her, a solid, reassuring presence in the face of the unknown. Bianca took a deep breath, steeling her nerves. "I have to be," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. "There's no turning back now." They approached the building, their footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Antonio knocked on the door, a firm, deliberate rap that echoed through the building. They waited, their hearts pounding in their chests. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, filled with unspoken truths, hidden fears, and the weight of generations of conflict. Finally, the door creaked open. A woman stood before them, her figure silhouetted against the warm glow of the interior light. She was younger than Bianca had expected, perhaps in her late 30s, with a cascade of dark, curly hair and piercing, intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through her. Her face was pale, her expression guarded, but there was a strength in her posture, a resilience that hinted at a life lived on the edge.
Sofia Romano?
Bianca asked, her voice barely a whisper. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze flickering between Bianca and Antonio. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied them, assessing the threat, searching for any sign of deception. "Who's asking?" She finally replied, her voice cautious, her tone laced with a hint of defiance. Bianca stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "My name is Bianca Marchesi. This is Antonio Salieri." The name Marchesi hung in the air, a loaded word, a symbol of betrayal and bloodshed. Sofia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of recognition. Of something else. Fear?
Anger?
Perhaps a mixture of both. "Marchesi," she repeated, her voice barely audible. She took a step back, her hand instinctively reaching for something inside her apartment, a weapon, perhaps. "We're not here to harm you, Sofia," Bianca said quickly, her voice calm and reassuring. "We need to talk.
We know about the past.
About the alliance between your family and mine." Sofia's expression hardened. "The alliance that ended in a massacre? The alliance that left my family dead and buried?" Her voice was filled with bitterness, with the raw pain of a wound that had never healed. Bianca felt a pang of guilt, a sense of responsibility for the sins of her husband's ancestors. "We know about the betrayal," Bianca continued, "and we know that you are the heir, the sole survivor." Sofia remained silent, her eyes fixed on Bianca, searching for any sign of deceit. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with unspoken accusations, hidden agendas, and the ghosts of the past. Antonio stepped forward, his voice calm and measured. "We believe that the past does not have to dictate the future, Sofia. We believe that there is a way for us to correct the wrongs that were committed." He paused, his gaze locking with Sofia's. "We need your help. And in return, we offer you justice. And perhaps something more." Sofia's eyes flickered, a flicker of uncertainty, of hope. The weight of unspoken truths hung heavy in the air, a burden shared between two women, two families, two legacies intertwined by fate and a thirst for revenge. The quiet street, the unassuming apartment, had become the stage for a drama that had been decades in the making. And the next act was about to begin. The silence that followed their appeal held the question that all three of them were dancing around. Could they truly trust each other? Chapter 5. Echoes of a Forgotten Promise. Sofia, after a long, tense silence, finally stepped aside, allowing Bianca and Antonio to enter her apartment. It was small, sparsely furnished, but meticulously clean and organized. There was a sense of quiet dignity about the space, a reflection of the woman who inhabited it. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old books, a comforting, familiar scent that momentarily eased Bianca's apprehension. "I've been waiting for this day," Sofia said, her voice low and steady, "but I never expected it to come like this. I expected violence, retribution." She closed the door behind them, the click of the lock echoing in the small room. She gestured towards a small, worn sofa, inviting them to sit. She herself remained standing, her arms crossed, her posture defensive. Bianca sat down, feeling the worn fabric beneath her fingertips. Antonio remained standing beside her, his presence a silent reassurance. "We understand your suspicion, Sofia," Bianca said, her voice sincere. "The history between our families is complicated, to say the least." Sofia nodded, her gaze fixed on the floor. "Complicated? It's a blood feud, a legacy of betrayal and death." "We know about the letters," Antonio said, his voice calm and measured. "The letters your grandfather wrote to Don Alessandro Marchesi. The letters detailing the agreement." Sofia's head snapped up, her eyes flashing with anger. "The agreement he broke. The agreement that cost my family everything." Bianca leaned forward, her voice earnest. We want to make things right, Sophia. We want to honor the original agreement. We want to give you what is rightfully yours. Sophia scoffed, a bitter, humorless sound. And why would you do that? Why would the Marquesses suddenly decide to honor an agreement made decades ago, an agreement they so brutally violated? Bianca met her gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and regret. Because I am not my husband, and I am not my husband's grandfather. I want to build a different future, a future based on cooperation, not conflict. A future where the past does not dictate the present. She paused, her voice softening. I know this is a lot to ask, Sophia. I know you have every reason to distrust us. But I am asking you to consider the possibility of working together, the possibility of ending this cycle of violence and betrayal. Sophia remained silent for a long moment, her eyes searching Bianca's face, looking for any sign of deception. The weight of her family's history, the burden of her own solitary existence, pressed down on her. I've spent my life preparing for revenge, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. I've learned to fight, to survive, to be ruthless. It's all I've ever known. There can be another way, Antonio said, his voice gentle but firm. Revenge is a fire that consumes everything in its path. It leaves nothing but ashes. He paused, his gaze locking with Sophia's. We offer you a different path, Sophia. A path to justice, yes, but also a path to healing. A path to the crest, she began, her voice strained, pointing towards Antonio's hand. It's Marquesi, but it's different. Antonio paused, his hand instinctively moving to cover the ring. He glanced at Bianca, a silent question in his eyes. Bianca gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He turned back to Sophia, his expression serious. It's an older version, he explained, his voice low and steady. From before Don Alessandro altered it. It was my father's. He believed in a different way. A way of honor, of respect, even for one's enemies. He swallowed, glancing at the floor, but his voice remained firm. He was Marco's uncle. Marco did not share those ideals. The unspoken truth hung in the air, the revelation of Antonio's own connection to the past, his own struggle with the Marquesi legacy. The forgotten promise was not just Sophia's burden, it was his as well. Chapter 6. The Serpent's Kiss. The uneasy truce established with Sophia Romano hung precariously in the balance. Bianca knew that gaining her trust would be a long and arduous process, a delicate dance of diplomacy and persuasion. The weight of the past, the legacy of betrayal, was a heavy burden to overcome. Meanwhile, the machinations within the Marquesi family continued. The Donati family, sensing weakness, were becoming increasingly bold in their attempts to undermine Bianca's authority. They were spreading rumors, questioning her ability to lead, and subtly, almost imperceptibly, challenging her position. Bianca knew she had to act decisively, to demonstrate her strength, to prove that she was not a grieving widow to be easily manipulated. She decided to call a meeting of the family elders, a gathering of the most influential members of the famiglia, to address the rumors and reassert her control. The meeting was held in the grand dining room of the palazzo, a room filled with portraits of past Marquesi dons, their stern gazes seeming to judge her every move. The long, mahogany table, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected the flickering candlelight, creating an atmosphere of both formality and unease. The elders arrived, their faces etched with a mixture of suspicion and resentment. They were men who were accustomed to power, to wielding influence, to being obeyed. They were not used to taking orders from a woman, especially a woman who had, until recently, been relegated to the sidelines. Bianca stood at the head of the table, her posture regal, her expression unyielding. She wore a simple, elegant black dress, a symbol of mourning, but also a statement of power. She had chosen her attire carefully, wanting to project an image of both strength and respect for tradition. I have called this meeting, she began, her voice clear and strong, echoing through the silent room, to address the concerns that have been raised about my leadership. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the faces of the elders, meeting their eyes, challenging their doubts. I am aware of the rumors, the whispers, the attempts to undermine my authority. I am not naive. I know that some of you believe I am not fit to lead this family. She allowed the silence to hang heavy in the air, letting her words sink in. But I am here to tell you that you are wrong. I am Marco Marchesi's widow. I know the workings of this family. I understand the challenges we face. And I am not afraid to make the difficult decisions that are necessary to protect our interests. She spoke with a conviction that surprised even herself. The words flowed from her, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose, a determination to prove her worth, not only to the elders, but to herself. She outlined her plans for the future of the family, her vision for a more stable, more prosperous future, a future that was not solely reliant on violence and intimidation. She spoke of diversifying their businesses, of forging new alliances, of adapting to the changing times. Her words were met with skepticism, with resistance, with outright hostility from some of the elders. They challenged her, questioned her, tried to provoke her. But Bianca remained calm, composed, her arguments logical and persuasive. She used the knowledge she had gained from Antonio, from her own research, to counter their objections, to expose their flaws, to dismantle their arguments. The meeting stretched on for hours, a grueling test of wills, a battle of wits, a struggle for control. Bianca felt the pressure mounting, the weight of expectation bearing down on her. But she refused to yield, to back down, to show any sign of weakness. As the meeting neared its end, one of the elders, Donatello Rizzo, a man known for his ruthlessness and his unwavering loyalty to Marco, spoke up. "You speak well, Signora Marchesi," he said, his voice laced with sarcasm. "But words are cheap. Actions are what matter. What will you do to prove your loyalty to this family? What will you do to protect us from our enemies?" He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, his gaze fixed on Bianca. "The Donattis are circling, Signora. They are waiting for an opportunity to strike. What will you do to stop them?" It was a challenge, a thinly veiled threat, a test of her resolve. Bianca met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. "I will do whatever is necessary, Donatello," she replied, her voice cold and steady. "I will protect this family, even if it means making difficult choices, even if it means shedding blood." Her words hung in the air, a stark reminder of the brutal reality of their world. The elders exchanged glances, a mixture of surprise and grudging respect in their eyes. Bianca had passed their test for now. She may speak of a new future, of a less violent path, but when cornered, she would show the family's true colors. As the meeting adjourned, Antonio approached Bianca, his expression concerned. "That was a risk, Bianca," he said, his voice low and serious. "You played a dangerous game." Bianca nodded, feeling the exhaustion creeping in. "I know, but I had to do it. I had to show them that I am not to be trifled with." He placed a hand on her arm, his touch warm and reassuring. "You were magnificent, Bianca. You showed them the strength they didn't know you possessed." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "Thank you, Antonio. I couldn't have done it without you." Just then, a servant entered the room, bearing a small, velvet-lined box. He presented it to Bianca, bowing low. "This was delivered for you, Signora Marchesi. No name, no message. Just this." Intrigue replaced the exhaustion, and Bianca took the box, her fingers tracing the smooth velvet. She opened it, a gasp escaping her lips. Inside, nestled on a bed of white satin, was a single, perfect white rose. And wrapped around its stem, a thin, gold chain with a small, intricately carved charm. It was a serpent, its eyes gleaming with tiny emeralds. The serpent was the sigil of the Romano family. It was a message from Sofia, without a doubt. But what did it mean? Chapter 7. Beneath the Veil of Civility. The white rose, with its serpent charm, was a carefully orchestrated message, a signal from Sofia that threw Bianca into a whirlwind of speculation. Was it a threat? An offer of alliance? Or something far more complex, a subtle maneuver in a game Bianca was only beginning to understand? It's a calculated move, Antonio said, studying the rose with a critical eye. Sophia is not one for impulsive gestures. Everything she does has a purpose. Bianca held the serpent charm, turning it over in her fingers. The emerald eyes seemed to gleam with an unnerving intelligence, a silent challenge. She's testing us, Bianca said, her voice thoughtful. She's trying to gauge our reaction, to see if we're truly willing to break with the past. The rose itself, a symbol of purity and innocence, was a stark contrast to the serpent, a symbol of betrayal and danger. It was a paradox, a reflection of Sophia's own conflicted nature, torn between the desire for revenge and the yearning for a different future. Bianca decided to respond in kind, to send a message of her own, a message that would demonstrate her willingness to negotiate, but also her strength, her refusal to be intimidated. She chose a single, perfect red rose, a symbol of passion and courage. And wrapped around its stem, she placed a small, silver chain with a charm, a lion, the Marchesi crest, but the older version, the one Antonio had shown her, the one that represented a different kind of power, a power based on honor and respect. She entrusted the rose to Riccardo Bellini, instructing him to deliver it to Sophia discreetly, without revealing his presence. Bellini, ever the professional, accepted the task without question, disappearing into the shadows, a silent messenger in a game of unspoken communication. Meanwhile, Bianca continued to navigate the treacherous waters of the Marchesi family. She began to implement her plans, subtly, almost imperceptibly, shifting the family's focus, diversifying their businesses, and forging new alliances. She used her charm, her intelligence, her newfound confidence to win over some of the elders, to convince them of the merits of her vision. She also began to investigate the Donati family more closely, uncovering their weaknesses, their vulnerabilities, their hidden agendas. She discovered that they were not as united as they appeared, that there were internal conflicts, rivalries, that could be exploited. She learned to play the game, to use deception, manipulation, and even a touch of ruthlessness when necessary. She was becoming a true Marchesi, but a Marchesi of her own making, a leader who was both feared and respected. One evening, while working late in the library, Bianca received a visit from Lorenzo, Marco's younger brother. Lorenzo was a volatile, unpredictable young man, known for his impulsive behavior and his resentment of Bianca. He had always been jealous of Marco's power, and he saw Bianca as an obstacle to his own ambitions. "You're playing a dangerous game, sister," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his eyes filled with a mixture of animosity and something else, something that resembled fear. Bianca looked up from her work, her expression calm and composed. "And what game is that, Lorenzo? You think you can control this family? You think you can replace Marco? You're a fool." He spat the words out, his voice filled with venom. Bianca remained unfazed. She had learned to deal with Lorenzo's outbursts, his childish tantrums. "I am not trying to replace Marco, Lorenzo," she said, her voice steady. "I am trying to protect this family, to ensure its future." "You're a liar," he hissed. "You're just like him. You're only interested in power." He pushed himself off the doorframe and approached her, his eyes blazing with anger. Bianca felt a flicker of fear, but she refused to show it. She stood her ground, meeting his gaze, challenging his aggression. "Get out, Lorenzo," she said, her voice cold and commanding. "I have work to do." He hesitated for a moment, his fists clenched, his body trembling with rage. But then, something in Bianca's eyes, something in her posture, made him back down. He turned and stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Bianca let out a long, shaky breath. She was learning to control her fear, to channel it, to use it to her advantage. But she knew that Lorenzo was a threat, a loose cannon who could potentially disrupt her plans. She was playing the game the family demanded, but she was also starting to build something new. The question she wrestled with as she sat back down to resume her work was which side of her would prevail. And would it be enough? The white rose, with its serpent charm, sat on her desk, a constant reminder of the delicate balance she was trying to maintain. Chapter 8. A Dance of Deception and Desire. The exchange of symbolic roses marked a turning point in Bianca's relationship with Sofia. It was a silent acknowledgement of their shared history, their mutual desire for a different future, and the beginning of a tentative, fragile alliance. They began to meet in secret, in quiet, out-of-the-way locations: a deserted church, a secluded park, a forgotten cafe on the outskirts of Naples. Their conversations were guarded at first, filled with suspicion and unspoken accusations. But gradually, as they shared their stories, their fears, their hopes, a bond began to form between them, a connection forged in shared pain and a mutual desire for justice. Sofia revealed the details of her life in hiding, the constant fear, the relentless training, the unwavering determination to avenge her family. She had learned to be resourceful, resilient, and utterly ruthless. She was a formidable woman, a warrior in her own right. Bianca, in turn, shared her own experiences, her 10 years of silence and submission, her gradual awakening, her determination to break free from the constraints of her past and forge a new path for herself and the Marchesi family. They discovered that they had more in common than they had initially realized. They were both women who had been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed as insignificant. They were both survivors, fighters, who had learned to navigate the treacherous world of the Mafia with cunning and courage. And they both harbored a secret, a hidden desire that simmered beneath the surface of their carefully constructed facades. A desire for something more than power, more than revenge, more than the endless cycle of violence and betrayal. The attraction between Bianca and Antonio, meanwhile, continued to grow, unspoken but undeniable. It was a dangerous game, a forbidden desire, fueled by the constant tension, the shared secrets, the ever-present threat of danger. They danced around their feelings, their interactions filled with subtle glances, lingering touches, unspoken words. The air between them crackled with electricity, a silent acknowledgement of the passion that simmered beneath the surface. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with Sofia, Bianca and Antonio found themselves alone in the library. The room was dimly lit, the only sound the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Antonio stood by the window, his gaze fixed on the city lights below. Bianca approached him, her heart pounding in her chest. "It's a dangerous game we're playing, Antonio," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to her, his eyes dark and intense. "I know," he replied, his voice low and husky. "But some games are worth playing." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. Bianca leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and desire. "I've never," she began, her voice faltering. "Neither have I," he said, his voice filled with a tenderness that surprised her. "Not like this." He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a tentative, hesitant kiss that sent shivers down her spine. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of unspoken desires, of a connection that transcended the boundaries of their world. But it was also a kiss that was fraught with danger, a kiss that could potentially destroy everything they had been working for. They were playing with fire, dancing on the edge of a precipice. Bianca pulled away, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "We can't," she said, her voice trembling. "It's too risky." Antonio nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and understanding. "I know," he said, "but that doesn't make it any less real." They stood there for a long moment, the silence between them filled with unspoken emotions, the weight of their forbidden desire. They knew they had to be careful, to keep their feelings hidden, to protect themselves and their fragile alliance with Sofia. But the dance of deception and desire had begun, and it was a dance that would inevitably lead them down a dangerous path, a path where the lines between love and loyalty, between passion and betrayal, would become increasingly blurred. The knowledge of the risk did nothing to quell the flame that had ignited between them. It only made it burn hotter. The rose, forgotten on a nearby table, seemed to sit in judgment of the passion that neither of them could fully deny. Chapter 9. The Price of Loyalty. The fragile alliance between Bianca and Sofia was tested almost immediately. Information, seemingly leaked from within the Marchesi family, reached the Donatis, revealing the existence of Sofia and her claim to the Marchesi Empire. The Donatis, sensing an opportunity to exploit the situation, made their move. They sent a message to Bianca, a thinly veiled threat disguised as an offer of negotiation. They demanded a meeting, a sit-down to discuss the future of the Marchesi family. Bianca knew that this was a trap, a ploy to either eliminate her and Sofia or to force them into a subservient position. "They know about Sofia," Bianca said to Antonio, her voice tight with anger and frustration. "Someone betrayed us." Antonio's face was grim. "We have a leak. Someone within the family is working with the Donatis." They began a frantic investigation, trying to identify the traitor, to plug the leak before it could cause any more damage. Suspicion fell on Lorenzo, Marco's volatile younger brother, who had always resented Bianca and coveted the leadership of the family. But they had no concrete proof, only circumstantial evidence. Meanwhile, Bianca had to decide how to respond to the Donati's demand. She couldn't simply refuse to meet them. That would be seen as a sign of weakness. But she also couldn't walk into their trap blindly. Sofia, surprisingly, offered a solution. "Let me go," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "Let me meet with the Donatis." Bianca was shocked. "That's insane, Sofia. They'll kill you." Sofia smiled, a cold, determined smile. "They won't expect me. They'll be expecting you. And I know how to handle myself." She had been trained for this, she explained, for years. She knew how to fight, how to negotiate, how to survive. And she had a plan, a daring, risky plan that could potentially turn the tables on the Donatis. Bianca was hesitant, reluctant to put Sofia in danger. But she also recognized the potential benefits of Sofia's plan. It was a gamble, a high-stakes maneuver that could either secure their position or destroy them completely. After a long, tense discussion with Antonio, Bianca reluctantly agreed. She knew that she was placing her trust and Sofia's life in the hands of a woman who had every reason to hate her. But she also sensed that Sofia was not motivated solely by revenge. She wanted something more, something that resonated with Bianca's own desires, a future free from the endless cycle of violence and betrayal. The meeting with the Donatis was arranged to take place at a neutral location, a seemingly abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Naples. It was a desolate, dangerous place, a fitting setting for a showdown between rival families. Sofia arrived at the warehouse, accompanied by Riccardo Bellini, who served as her bodyguard, her silent protector. Bianca and Antonio remained hidden nearby, monitoring the situation, ready to intervene if necessary. The Donatis were represented by Don Carlo Donati, the head of the family, and his two sons, both known for their ruthlessness and their ambition. They were surprised, and visibly unnerved, by Sofia's presence. They had expected Bianca, the grieving widow, the easy target. They had not anticipated facing the ghost of the past, the Romano heir, the woman who had every reason to seek their destruction. Sofia played her part perfectly. She was calm, composed, her demeanor both defiant and respectful. She presented herself as the rightful heir to the Marchesi Empire, demanding recognition and a share of the family's businesses. The Donatis, initially dismissive, gradually realized that they had underestimated her. She was not a naive, easily manipulated woman. She was a force to be reckoned with, a worthy adversary. The negotiations were tense, filled with veiled threats and subtle power plays. Sofia, using the knowledge she had gained from Bianca and Antonio, managed to outmaneuver the Donatis, exposing their weaknesses, their lies, their hidden agendas. But Don Carlo gave a slight nod, and one of his sons moved subtly, swiftly, grabbing Sofia. It happened so fast that Bellini could not intercede. The elder Donati chuckled as she struggled. "Did you truly believe we play fair, Romano? Your family was filth, and you will join them." Just as he was about to strike, a shot rang out, and the younger Donati fell, a spreading stain blooming. Antonio. Chaos erupts. Bellini moves, his movements a blur, disabling several guards. More shots ring out. It becomes apparent the Donati plan to slaughter them all. The warehouse floor becomes a horrifying stage. Bianca, unable to remain at the fringes, moves towards the warehouse. As Sofia, free of her captor, moves towards a fallen weapon, Don Carlo levels his own. Before he fires, a knife, thrown with deadly precision, buries itself in his neck. Lorenzo. He stands, pale, panting, at the warehouse entrance, more appearing behind him, loyal to him. This, he shouts, his voice strangely hoarse, is my family.
Meaning?
The price of loyalty had been paid, in blood, in betrayal, and in a surprising act of redemption. The question remained, whose loyalty, and at what ultimate cost? Chapter 10. Scars of the Past. The aftermath of the warehouse confrontation was a chaotic blend of relief, confusion, and simmering tension. Lorenzo's unexpected intervention, his claim of familial loyalty, had saved Sofia and disrupted the Donati's plans, but it had also thrown everything into disarray. His motives were unclear, his allegiance uncertain. Was it a genuine act of redemption, or a calculated move to seize power for himself? Bianca was deeply shaken by the violence, by the near-death experience of Sofia, and by the realization that the betrayal had come from within her own family, even if the ultimate outcome seemed, on the surface, to save them all. She found herself grappling with a mix of gratitude towards Lorenzo and a deep-seated suspicion of his true intentions. Antonio, ever the pragmatist, focused on damage control. He secured the warehouse, ensuring that the Donati's remaining forces were neutralized and that any evidence of the conflict was erased. He also began a thorough investigation into Lorenzo's actions, trying to determine the extent of his involvement with the Donati's and the motivations behind his sudden shift in allegiance. Sofia, despite her physical ordeal, remained remarkably composed. She had faced death before, had lived with the constant threat of violence for years. But the experience had shaken her, reminding her of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the past. He saved my life, Sofia said to Bianca, her voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. Lorenzo, the man who hated you, who wanted to take everything from you. He saved my life. Bianca nodded, her own emotions a tangled mess. I don't understand it, Sofia. I don't understand him. He's always been unpredictable, volatile. They were sitting in Bianca's private study, a small, intimate room overlooking the Palazzo Gardens. The room was filled with the scent of old books and the soft glow of lamplight, a sanctuary from the chaos and violence of the outside world. Perhaps, Sofia said, her voice thoughtful, he's not as simple as we thought. Perhaps there's more to him than just ambition and resentment. She paused, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames of the fireplace. We all carry scars, Bianca. Scars of the past. Scars that shape us, define us, drive us. Perhaps Lorenzo's scars are deeper than we realize. Bianca knew that Sofia was right. They all carried scars, wounds that had been inflicted by their families, by their past, by the brutal world they inhabited. And those scars, often hidden, often unspoken, had a profound impact on their choices, their actions, their destinies. As the days passed, Bianca began to piece together the fragments of Lorenzo's past, uncovering a history of neglect, of emotional abuse, of a constant struggle for recognition and acceptance. He had always lived in Marco's shadow, overshadowed by his brother's charisma and power. He had been treated as a pawn, a tool, a means to an end. She discovered that Lorenzo had, in fact, been secretly communicating with the Donatis, feeding them information, fueling their ambition, hoping to use them to destabilize the Marchesi family and seize control for himself. But his plan had backfired. He had underestimated the Donatis' ruthlessness, their willingness to betray anyone, even their own allies. When he saw Sofia in danger, when he realized that the Donatis were planning to eliminate everyone, including him, he had a moment of clarity, a sudden, unexpected surge of loyalty to his family, a family he had always resented but also, perhaps, secretly loved. Bianca confronted Lorenzo, not with accusations and anger, but with understanding and a surprising offer of forgiveness. She acknowledged his pain, his resentment, his ambition, and she offered him a chance to redeem himself, to earn a place in the family, not through violence and betrayal, but through loyalty and service. It was a risky move, a gamble that could potentially backfire. But Bianca sensed that beneath Lorenzo's volatile exterior, beneath his scars of the past, there was a glimmer of something else, something that resembled honor, something that could be nurtured and shaped into something positive. Lorenzo, initially defensive and suspicious, gradually responded to Bianca's offer. He was torn between his desire for power and a newfound sense of belonging, a longing for acceptance and forgiveness. The scars of the past were still there, raw and painful, but they were beginning to heal slowly, almost imperceptibly. The weight of those scars, however, threatened to drag him back into the darkness at any moment. He stared out the window as she spoke, his back to her, his shoulders rigid. Only the slight tremor of his hands gave away the depth of emotion he was clearly trying to contain. It was, Bianca realized, the first time she'd ever truly seen him. Chapter 11. The Lioness Awakens. With Lorenzo's tentative redemption and the Donatis temporarily subdued, Bianca finally had the space to focus on consolidating her power and implementing her vision for the Marchesi family. She had proven her strength, her resilience, her ability to navigate the treacherous world of the Mafia. She was no longer seen as the grieving widow, the passive figurehead. She was the capo, the leader, the lioness protecting her pride. She began to make significant changes, restructuring the family's businesses, diversifying their investments, and moving away from the traditional reliance on violence and intimidation. She invested in legitimate enterprises, creating jobs and opportunities for the community, building a foundation of respect and goodwill. She also forged new alliances, reaching out to other families, not as rivals, but as potential partners. She used her charm, her intelligence, her diplomatic skills to build bridges, to create a network of support and cooperation. Antonio remained her closest advisor, her confidant, her unwavering supporter. Their relationship, still unspoken, still forbidden, deepened with each passing day. The shared danger, the shared secrets, the mutual respect and admiration had forged a bond between them that was stronger than any formal alliance. They spent hours together, poring over documents, discussing strategies, planning for the future. Their conversations were often intense, filled with passionate debates and heated arguments. But they always found a way to compromise, to find common ground, to reach a consensus. One evening, as they were working late in the library, Antonio paused, his gaze fixed on Bianca. "You've changed, Bianca," he said, his voice soft and filled with a mixture of admiration and something else, something that resembled longing. Bianca looked up from her work, her eyes meeting his. "We've all changed, Antonio," she replied, her voice equally soft. "You've become the leader you were always meant to be," he said. "You've found your strength, your voice, your purpose." He reached out and gently touched her hand, his fingers lingering on hers. Bianca felt a jolt of electricity pass through her, a wave of desire that she could no longer deny. "And you," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "you've helped me become who I am. You've shown me my own strength. You've believed in me when no one else did." He smiled, a rare, fleeting expression that lit up his face. "You always had it in you, Bianca. I just helped you see it." They fell silent, their eyes locked, the unspoken emotions swirling between them. The air crackled with tension, with desire, with the forbidden nature of their attraction. Bianca knew that she was playing a dangerous game, that her feelings for Antonio could potentially jeopardize everything she had worked for. But she couldn't help herself. She was drawn to him, to his strength, his loyalty, his unwavering support. She leaned in, her lips brushing against his, a tentative, hesitant kiss that quickly deepened into something more passionate, more intense. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of desire, of a connection that transcended the boundaries of their world. It was a kiss that was interrupted by a sudden, urgent knock on the door. Lorenzo burst into the room, his face pale, his eyes wide with alarm. "We have a problem," he said, his voice breathless. "Sofia, she's gone." Bianca's heart sank. She felt a surge of fear, a premonition of danger. Sofia's disappearance could only mean one thing: trouble.
Gone?
Bianca asked, her voice sharp with concern. "What do you mean, gone?" "She left a message," Lorenzo said, handing Bianca a small, crumpled piece of paper. "She said she had to take care of something. Something urgent. Something she couldn't tell us about." Bianca unfolded the paper, her hands trembling. The message was brief, cryptic, written in Sofia's distinctive, hurried scrawl. "I have to face the past. Alone. Don't follow me." The lioness had awakened, but now one of her own was in danger, and the hunt was about to begin. The brief, stolen moment of passion was forgotten, replaced by the cold, hard reality of their world. Chapter 12. A Game of Thrones and Hearts. Sofia's abrupt disappearance sent a wave of fear and uncertainty through Bianca and Antonio. They knew that Sofia was resourceful, resilient, and capable of handling herself, but her cryptic message, her insistence on facing the past alone, was deeply unsettling. "She's going after whoever was behind the original betrayal," Antonio said, his voice grim. "The person who orchestrated the massacre of her family." Bianca nodded, her mind racing, trying to piece together the fragments of information, the clues that Sofia had uncovered over the years. "But who?" she asked. "Who could have had the power, the motive, to betray both the Romanos and the Marqueses?" They spent hours poring over old documents, family histories, searching for any hint, any clue that might lead them to Sofia and to the truth. They investigated the past, delving into the murky world of alliances and betrayals, of secret deals and hidden agendas. They discovered that Don Alessandro Marchesi, Marco's grandfather, had been a ruthless, ambitious man, willing to do anything to consolidate his power. He had made numerous enemies, forged numerous alliances, and broken numerous promises. But there was one name that kept surfacing, a name that was whispered in the shadows, a name that was associated with both the Romanos and the Marqueses: Silvio Bellini. Riccardo Bellini's uncle. The revelation sent a shockwave through Bianca and Antonio. Riccardo Bellini, the shadow, the man they had trusted, the man who had helped them, was connected to the original betrayal. Could he have been playing them all along? Was he working with Sofia, or against her? "We need to find Riccardo," Bianca said, her voice tight with urgency.
"He knows something."
"He has to." They launched a frantic search for Bellini, using all their resources, all their contacts, to track him down. But Bellini had vanished, disappearing into the shadows, leaving no trace. He was a ghost, a phantom, a master of deception. Meanwhile, Lorenzo, surprisingly, proved to be a valuable asset. He used his knowledge of the city's underbelly, his contacts within the criminal underworld, to gather information, to follow leads, to uncover clues. He was driven by a newfound sense of purpose, a desire to prove his loyalty to Bianca and to redeem himself for his past mistakes. He discovered that Sofia had been investigating a series of old, abandoned properties that had once belonged to the Romano family, properties that were now owned by a shell corporation, a corporation that was linked to Silvio Bellini. "She's looking for something," Lorenzo said, his voice excited. "Something that will expose the truth, something that will bring down whoever was behind the betrayal." He had managed to track Sofia's movements, tracing her to an old, dilapidated villa on the outskirts of Naples, a villa that had once been the Romano family's summer retreat, a place filled with memories, both happy and tragic. Bianca, Antonio, and Lorenzo raced to the villa, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. They knew that Sofia was walking into a trap, that she was facing a dangerous enemy, an enemy who had been waiting for decades to exact their revenge. The villa was shrouded in darkness, the silence broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant sound of the sea. It was a desolate, eerie place, a place filled with the ghosts of the past. As they approached the villa, they saw a faint light flickering in one of the windows. They knew that Sophia was inside, and that the final confrontation was about to begin. It was a game of thrones and hearts, and the stakes were higher than ever. And in this game, only one could be left standing. The flickering light offered a silent challenge, and the next move would determine the fate of them all. Chapter 13. The Unraveling of Secrets. The interior of the Romano villa was a decaying reflection of its former grandeur. Dust motes danced in the faint moonlight filtering through shattered windows, illuminating faded tapestries and crumbling plaster. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and forgotten memories. Bianca, Antonio, and Lorenzo moved cautiously through the silent rooms, their senses on high alert. They could feel Sophia's presence, a palpable tension in the air, a sense of imminent danger. They found her in the villa's grand ballroom, a vast, echoing space with a cracked marble floor and a tattered chandelier hanging precariously from the ceiling. She was standing in the center of the room, facing a lone figure shrouded in shadows. "Silvio," Sophia said, her voice clear and steady, echoing through the silent ballroom. "I've been waiting for you." The figure stepped forward, revealing himself in the faint light. It was indeed Silvio Bellini, Riccardo's uncle, an old man with a weathered face and piercing, intelligent eyes. He looked frail, but there was a strength in his posture, a ruthlessness in his gaze that belied his age. "Sophia Romano," he said, his voice a low, raspy growl. "The last of the line. You've come to seek your revenge, I presume." "I've come for the truth," Sophia replied, her voice unwavering. "I want to know why. Why you betrayed my family. Why you betrayed your own alliance." Silvio chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Loyalty is a fleeting thing, child. Power is what matters. And your family stood in the way of my ambitions." He explained, his voice filled with a chilling detachment, how he had manipulated Don Alessandro Marchesi, how he had used the alliance between the Romanos and the Marchesis to eliminate his own rivals, to consolidate his own power. He had orchestrated the massacre of the Romanos, believing that he had eliminated all threats to his ambition. "But you survived," he said, his gaze fixed on Sophia. "A loose end. A mistake I intend to rectify." He raised his hand, revealing a small, silver pistol. Bianca, Antonio, and Lorenzo moved to intervene, but Silvio was faster. He fired, the shot echoing through the silent ballroom. Sophia cried out, clutching her arm, a crimson stain spreading across her sleeve. But she didn't fall. She stood her ground, her eyes blazing with defiance. Before Silvio could fire again, Riccardo Bellini appeared, seemingly out of nowhere, his movements swift and silent. He disarmed his uncle, his face a mask of cold fury. "You will not touch her," Riccardo said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. Silvio looked at his nephew, his eyes filled with a mixture of surprise and betrayal. "Riccardo? You would betray your own family?" Riccardo's expression didn't change.
"You are no family of mine," he said.
"You are a monster, a murderer, and I will not let you continue your reign of terror." He had known, he explained, about his uncle's past, about the betrayal of the Romanos. He had been waiting for the right moment to expose him, to bring him to justice. He had used Bianca and Antonio, manipulated them, to get closer to Sophia, to protect her, to ensure that his uncle's sins would finally be revealed. The unraveling of secrets was complete. The truth, long buried, had finally come to light. Silvio Bellini, the architect of so much pain and suffering, was exposed, his power broken, his legacy shattered. Bianca, watching the scene unfold, felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. The pieces of the puzzle had finally fallen into place, revealing a picture far more complex and twisted than she could have ever imagined. She had walked the line between doing what was needed and becoming the very thing she had sworn to oppose, using the same tactics, the same deceptions. As the authorities arrived to take Silvio into custody, Lorenzo approached Sophia, his expression filled with a mixture of remorse and concern. "I'm sorry, Sophia," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "For everything. For my family's sins. For my own mistakes." Sophia looked at him, her eyes softening slightly. "We all make mistakes, Lorenzo," she said. "The important thing is that we learn from them, that we try to be better." The unraveling of secrets had brought closure, but it had also left scars, wounds that would take time to heal. The past was finally laid to rest, but the future remained uncertain, a path yet to be forged. The villa stood silent, the echoes of gunshots and accusations fading into the night. Only the truth remained. Chapter 14. Where Trust Lies Bleeding. The arrest of Silvio Bellini and the revelation of his long-held secrets sent ripples through the Neapolitan underworld. The balance of power shifted, alliances were re-evaluated, and the Marchesi family, under Bianca's leadership, emerged stronger and more unified than ever before. But the events at the Romano villa had also exposed deep fissures within the fragile web of trust that Bianca had so carefully constructed. Riccardo Bellini's deception, his manipulation of both Bianca and Sofia, left a lingering sense of unease, a question mark hanging over his true motives and loyalties. "Can we trust him, Antonio?" Bianca asked, her voice troubled. They were sitting in her study, the aftermath of the confrontation still fresh in their minds. Antonio's face was grim. "He played us all, Bianca. He used us to achieve his own ends. But he also saved Sofia's life. He brought his uncle to justice." He paused, his gaze fixed on the flickering flames of the fireplace. "He's a dangerous man, Bianca. But he's also a valuable asset. We need to keep him close, watch him carefully, but we can't afford to alienate him completely." Bianca knew that Antonio was right. Riccardo Bellini was a complex, unpredictable character, a man who walked the line between darkness and light. He was a risk, but he was also a potentially powerful ally. She decided to confront Riccardo, to demand answers, to understand his motivations. She met him at a neutral location, a small, unassuming cafe in the heart of Naples. Riccardo was, as always, calm and composed, his expression unreadable. He didn't deny his deception, his manipulation. He admitted that he had used Bianca and Sofia to achieve his own goals, to avenge his family's honor, to bring his uncle to justice. "I did what I had to do," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "I played the game. I won." Bianca's anger flared. "You used us, Riccardo. You put Sofia's life in danger." He met her gaze, his eyes cold and calculating. "And I saved her life, Bianca. I could have let my uncle kill her. I could have walked away. But I didn't." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I have my own code, Bianca. My own sense of loyalty. It may not be the same as yours, but it's there." He explained that he had always known about his uncle's crimes, had always resented him for the stain he had brought upon the Bellini name. He had been waiting for the right moment to strike, to expose him, to reclaim his family's honor. "I chose you, Bianca," he said, "because I saw in you a strength, a determination, a willingness to break with the past. I saw in you a potential ally." Bianca was torn. She didn't fully trust Riccardo, but she also couldn't deny the truth in his words. He had played a dangerous game, but he had ultimately achieved a positive outcome. "I need your loyalty, Riccardo," she said, her voice firm. "Not your deception. Not your manipulation. I need you to be honest with me, to work with me, to help me build a better future for this city." He considered her words, his eyes searching hers. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken tension, the weight of their shared history, their uncertain future. "I can offer you that, Bianca," he finally said, his voice low and steady. "But on my own terms. I will not be your pawn. I will not be your puppet. I will be your ally, but I will also be my own man." It was an agreement, a fragile truce, a pact forged in the aftermath of betrayal and violence. Trust lay bleeding, wounded but not broken. Bianca knew that she was taking a risk, that she was placing her faith in a man who had proven himself to be capable of deception. But she also sensed that Riccardo Bellini, despite his flaws, despite his darkness, was a man of his word. As she left the cafe, walking through the bustling streets, the city seemed full of different possibilities. She thought of Antonio, his steadfast support, their unspoken bond. He was her one sure thing. She was sure. Wasn't she? The question lingered, even as she knew, intellectually, she could trust him. The residue of Ricardo's deception still clung. She made a decision. She would not allow it to poison what was real, what was true. She headed towards his home. She would not live in fear. Chapter 15. Fire and Ice. Bianca's arrival at Antonio's modest apartment was unexpected. He lived a quiet life, far removed from the opulent grandeur of the Marchesi Palazzo. His home was a reflection of his personality, simple, understated, but filled with a quiet elegance. He opened the door, his eyes widening in surprise.
Bianca?
What are you doing here? She stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't have a plan, a carefully crafted speech. She just knew that she needed to see him, to be with him, to reaffirm the connection that had become her anchor in a world of chaos and uncertainty. I needed to see you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He closed the door behind her, his gaze searching hers. He could sense her unease, her vulnerability. The events of the past few weeks had taken their toll on her, on both of them. Are you all right? He asked, his voice filled with concern. She nodded, forcing a smile. I will be, she said. Now that I'm here. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his fingers tracing the curve of her jawline. Bianca leaned into his touch, her eyes closing, her body trembling with a mixture of relief and anticipation. I've been worried about you, he said, his voice low and husky. I know, she replied. And I've been thinking. She told him about her meeting with Ricardo, about the uneasy truce they had forged, about the lingering doubts that still plagued her. She confessed her fear, her uncertainty, her vulnerability. Antonio listened patiently, his eyes filled with understanding and compassion. He didn't judge her, didn't offer easy answers. He just listened, providing a safe space for her to express her emotions, to unravel the tangled knot of her feelings. You did what you had to do, Bianca, he said, his voice gentle but firm. You made a difficult decision, a calculated risk. That's what leaders do. He paused, his gaze locking with hers. And you don't have to do it alone. I'm here for you, Bianca. Always. His words were a balm to her soul, a reassurance that she was not alone in this fight, that she had someone she could rely on, someone she could trust implicitly. I know, she said, her voice filled with gratitude. And I need you, Antonio. More than you know. The unspoken emotions that had simmered between them for so long finally erupted, breaking through the barriers of their carefully constructed facades. The fire that had been banked, the ice that had encased their hearts, melted away, revealing a passion that was both intense and tender. He leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, a tentative, hesitant kiss that quickly deepened into something more profound, more consuming. It was a kiss that spoke of longing, of desire, of a connection that transcended the boundaries of their world, the constraints of their past. It was a kiss that was interrupted, not by a threat or a crisis, but by a soft, almost imperceptible sound.
A sigh.
A release. Bianca pulled away, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She looked at Antonio, her eyes filled with a mixture of passion and something else. Something that resembled peace. I've been afraid, she confessed, her voice barely audible. Afraid of feeling, afraid of trusting, afraid of loving. Antonio nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. I know, he said. Me too. He took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. But we don't have to be afraid anymore, Bianca, he said. We can face this together. We can be strong together. The fire and ice had merged, creating a warmth, a strength, a bond that was unbreakable. They had found solace in each other's arms, a refuge from the storm, a sanctuary from the chaos and violence of their world. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet intimacy of Antonio's apartment, Bianca finally felt safe. Truly safe. And ready. She was about to speak, to tell him all of this, when a flicker of movement outside the window caught her eye. A shadow. Gone as quickly as it appeared. but it left a cold certainty. They were not alone, and the peace they had found was fragile and likely fleeting. Chapter 16. The Cost of Redemption. The fleeting shadow outside Antonio's window shattered the fragile peace, plunging Bianca and Antonio back into the harsh reality of their world. The sense of security, of intimacy, evaporated, replaced by a chilling awareness of their vulnerability. "Someone was watching us," Bianca said, her voice tight with alarm. Antonio moved swiftly, extinguishing the lamps, plunging the apartment into darkness. He peered through the curtains, his eyes scanning the street below. "I don't see anyone," he said, his voice low and cautious. "But that doesn't mean they're not there." They knew that they were targets, that their enemies were always lurking, waiting for an opportunity to strike. The price of power, of leadership, was constant vigilance, a perpetual state of alert. Bianca's mind raced, trying to identify the potential threat. Was it the Donatis, seeking revenge? Was it a rival family, sensing weakness? Or was it someone closer to home, someone they trusted, someone who had betrayed them? "We need to be careful," Antonio said, his voice grim. "We can't afford to let our guard down, not even for a moment." They spent the rest of the night in a state of heightened alert, their senses on edge, their bodies tense and ready for action. They discussed their options, their strategies, their plans for dealing with a potential threat. But beneath the surface of their strategic discussions, beneath the veneer of their professional demeanor, there was a deeper, more personal concern. The shadow outside the window had not only threatened their physical safety, but it had also cast a shadow over their burgeoning relationship, their newfound intimacy. They had glimpsed a future together, a future free from the constraints of their past, a future filled with love and companionship. But the shadow reminded them that their world was a dangerous place, that their happiness was fragile, that their love was a risk. As dawn approached, casting a pale light over the city, Bianca made a decision. She couldn't live in fear, constantly looking over her shoulder, constantly worrying about the next threat. She had to take control, to be proactive, to protect herself and the people she cared about. "We need to find out who is watching us," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "And we need to send a message that we are not afraid, a message that we will not be intimidated." Antonio nodded, his eyes filled with admiration for her strength, her courage, her determination. "I agree," he said. "We need to take the fight to them." They began to investigate, using their resources, their contacts, to uncover the identity of the shadow, to track down the person who had been spying on them. They discovered that it was a low-level member of a rival family, a family that had been quietly observing the Marqueses, assessing their strength, looking for an opportunity to exploit their weaknesses. Bianca decided to make an example of them, to send a clear and unmistakable message to anyone who dared to threaten her or her family. She orchestrated a swift, decisive, and utterly ruthless retaliation, demonstrating her power, her resolve, her willingness to protect her own. It was a brutal act, a display of force that reminded everyone of the Marchesi family's ruthlessness, their ability to crush their enemies. But it was also an act of desperation, a desperate attempt to protect the fragile peace she had found, the burgeoning love she had discovered. The cost of redemption was high, paid in blood and fear. Bianca had hoped to build a different future, a future free from violence and intimidation. But she was beginning to realize that the past was not so easily escaped, that the ghosts of her family's legacy still haunted her, still demanded their due. As she stood over the aftermath of her actions, a chilling wind sweeping across, she saw Lorenzo approach. He'd been instrumental in the swift retaliation. But his eyes, they held a darkness she hadn't seen before. Or, perhaps, she thought with a sick feeling, she'd simply chosen not to see. "It is done, Bianca," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any emotion. "They will not bother you again." He looked at her, a strange, unsettling glint in his eyes. "You are becoming like Marco," he said.
Strong.
"Ruthless."
Feared.
His words were meant as a compliment, a recognition of her power. But they chilled Bianca to the bone. Was she becoming the very thing she had sworn to oppose? Was she losing herself in the brutal world of the Mafia, sacrificing her soul for the sake of survival? The cost, she realized, might be far greater than she had ever imagined. Chapter 17. Broken Vows, Renewed Strength. Lorenzo's words hung in the air, a chilling indictment of Bianca's transformation. She had strived to break free from the cycle of violence, to forge a new path for the Marchesi family, but the brutal realities of their world had forced her to compromise her ideals, to embrace the very tactics she had once condemned. The realization that she was becoming like Marco, the man she had despised, the man whose shadow she had struggled to escape, filled her with a deep sense of unease, a profound sense of loss. She had sacrificed so much, endured so much, to build a different future, but the past seemed to be pulling her back, dragging her down into the darkness. She found herself questioning her choices, her actions, her very identity. Was she still the woman who had dreamed of a different life, a life free from violence and betrayal? Or had she become just another capo, a ruthless leader willing to do anything to protect her power? She sought solace in Antonio's presence, finding comfort in his unwavering support, his steadfast love. He was her anchor, her conscience, her reminder of the woman she had once been, the woman she still hoped to be. "I don't know who I am anymore, Antonio," she confessed, her voice filled with anguish. They were sitting in her private study, the room filled with the scent of old books and the soft glow of lamplight, a sanctuary from the chaos and violence of the outside world. Antonio took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. "You are still Bianca," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You are still the woman I fell in love with. The woman who is strong, courageous, and compassionate." He acknowledged the difficult choices she had made, the compromises she had been forced to accept. But he also reminded her of the positive changes she had brought about, the lives she had saved, the opportunities she had created. "You are not Marco," he said, his eyes filled with conviction. "You are different. You are better. You are building a different legacy." His words were a balm to her soul, a reassurance that she had not completely lost her way, that there was still hope for redemption, for a future that was not solely defined by the sins of the past. Bianca decided to take a step back, to reevaluate her priorities, to reconnect with her original vision for the Marchesi family. She delegated some of her responsibilities to trusted advisors, giving them more autonomy, more control over the day-to-day operations of the family's businesses. She focused on strengthening her relationships with her allies, building bridges with other families, fostering a sense of cooperation and mutual respect. She used her influence, her power, to promote peace, to resolve conflicts, to create a more stable and prosperous environment for everyone. She also made a conscious effort to distance herself from the more brutal aspects of the Mafia world, refusing to engage in unnecessary violence, refusing to resort to intimidation and threats. She sought to lead by example, to demonstrate that there was another way, a better way, to achieve her goals. She even reached out to Sophia, seeking her counsel, her perspective, her friendship. Sophia, despite her own reservations, responded with understanding and support. They had both been shaped by the violence of their past, but they were both determined to create a different future. One evening, as Bianca and Antonio were walking through the Palazzo Gardens, enjoying a rare moment of peace and tranquility, they came across a small, secluded chapel, a hidden sanctuary that had been neglected for years. The chapel was filled with dust and cobwebs, the stained glass windows clouded with grime, the altar covered in a thick layer of dust. But there was a sense of serenity about the place, a quiet dignity that resonated with Bianca's soul. Bianca reached into her pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Antonio looked at her, questioningly. She opened it, showing a simple gold band. "Marco gave me many things," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "but never a blessing. Not a real one." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a hope that was both desperate and sincere. "Will you, now will you give me that? Will you be mine?" Antonio's breath caught. He took the ring, his fingers trembling slightly, and spoke the words he had longed to say, vows of love, of loyalty, of a future together, a future they would build, not on the foundations of the past, but on the promise of a new beginning. It was a moment of profound significance, a symbol of their renewed commitment to each other, to their love, to their shared vision for a different future. The broken vows of the past were replaced by renewed strength, a strength born of love, of forgiveness, of a shared determination to break free from the cycle of violence and betrayal. They had both been tested, both been wounded, but they had emerged stronger, more resilient, more determined than ever to create a life together, a life filled with hope, with peace, with love. They knelt together, the light streaming through the dust-covered windows, a symbol of the new dawn. He slipped the ring on her finger. It was a perfect fit. Chapter 18. The Gathering Storm. The quiet ceremony in the neglected chapel marked a turning point for Bianca and Antonio. Their secret vows, their renewed commitment to each other, gave them strength, a sense of purpose, a foundation upon which to build their future. But their newfound peace was short-lived. The world of the Mafia was a volatile, unpredictable place, and the storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Lorenzo, despite his apparent redemption, had become increasingly distant, his behavior erratic, his eyes filled with a darkness that Bianca couldn't ignore. He had immersed himself in the more brutal aspects of the family business, embracing the violence and intimidation that Bianca had tried to avoid. "I'm worried about him, Antonio," Bianca confessed. "He's changed. He's becoming like Marco." Antonio nodded, his face grim. "I've noticed it too. He's on a dangerous path. We need to keep a close eye on him." They tried to reach out to Lorenzo, to offer him guidance, support, a chance to change his course. But he rebuffed their efforts, pushing them away, isolating himself in a world of violence and darkness. Meanwhile, a new threat emerged, a coalition of rival families who saw Bianca's attempts at reform as a sign of weakness, an opportunity to seize power. They began to encroach on Marchese territory, challenging their authority, disrupting their businesses. The Donatis, still smarting from their defeat, were at the forefront of this coalition, eager to reclaim their lost prestige and exact revenge on Bianca and Sofia. They had been quietly rebuilding their strength, forging new alliances, and waiting for the opportune moment to strike. Bianca found herself facing a multi-pronged attack, a coordinated effort to undermine her leadership, to dismantle her empire, to destroy everything she had worked so hard to build. She knew that she had to respond decisively, to demonstrate her strength, to prove that she was not a weak, easily manipulated leader. But she was also determined to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, to find a way to resolve the conflict without resorting to the brutal tactics of the past. She called a meeting of her closest advisors, including Antonio, Riccardo Bellini, and even Sofia, who had become a trusted ally and confidant. They discussed their options, their strategies, their plans for dealing with a growing threat. "We need to show them that we are united," Bianca said, her voice firm and resolute. "That we are not afraid. That we will not be intimidated." They decided to stage a show of force, a demonstration of their power and reach, to send a clear message to their enemies that they were not to be trifled with. But they also agreed to explore diplomatic solutions, to reach out to the rival families, to offer them a chance to negotiate, to avoid a full-scale war. The situation was tense, the atmosphere charged with anticipation. The gathering storm was about to break, and the future of the Marchese family, the fate of Naples, hung in the balance. As Bianca prepared for the inevitable confrontation, she found herself reflecting on her journey, on the choices she had made, on the sacrifices she had endured. She had come so far, transformed herself from a grieving widow into a powerful leader, a force to be reckoned with. But she had also paid a heavy price, sacrificing her innocence, compromising her ideals, embracing the darkness in order to survive. She had learned that the world of the Mafia was a brutal, unforgiving place, where trust was a rare commodity and betrayal was a constant threat. She looked at Antonio, her husband in all but name, his face etched with concern, his eyes filled with love and unwavering support. He was her rock, her anchor, her reason for fighting. "We'll get through this, Bianca," he said, his voice reassuring. "Together." She nodded, her heart filled with a mixture of fear and determination. She was ready to face the storm, to defend her family, to protect her love, to fight for the future she had vowed to build. The gathering storm was about to break, and Bianca, the lioness, was ready to roar. And as she looked out the window at the darkening sky, she knew, with a chilling certainty, that this would be a fight unlike any she had faced before. Chapter 19. A Legacy Redefined. The storm broke with a ferocity that surprised even Bianca. The rival families, led by the Donatis, launched a coordinated attack on multiple fronts, targeting Marchesi businesses, ambushing their soldiers, and spreading chaos and fear throughout Naples. Bianca, Antonio, and their allies responded swiftly and decisively, mobilizing their forces, defending their territory, and retaliating against their enemies. The city became a battleground, a scene of violence and bloodshed, a stark reminder of the brutal realities of the Mafia world. Lorenzo, despite his increasingly erratic behavior, fought with a ferocity that bordered on recklessness. He seemed to relish the violence, the chaos, the opportunity to prove his strength, his loyalty, his worth. He was a whirlwind of destruction, a force of nature, leaving a trail of carnage in his wake. Bianca watched him with a mixture of pride and concern. She was grateful for his fighting prowess, his unwavering commitment to the family, but she also feared that he was losing himself in the darkness, that he was becoming the very thing she had tried to prevent. The conflict raged for days, a brutal, exhausting struggle for survival. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and the city of Naples was plunged into a state of fear and uncertainty. Bianca, despite her determination to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, was forced to make difficult choices, to authorize actions that went against her own conscience, to protect her family and her empire. She found herself increasingly relying on Antonio's counsel, his strategic brilliance, his unwavering support. He was her rock, her anchor, her conscience, helping her navigate the treacherous waters of the conflict, reminding her of her original vision, her commitment to building a different future. Sophia, too, proved to be an invaluable ally, fighting alongside Bianca and Antonio, using her skills, her knowledge, her experience to defend their shared interests. She had found a new purpose, a new family, a new sense of belonging. As the conflict reached its climax, Bianca received a message from Don Carlo Donati, the head of the rival coalition. He proposed a meeting, a sit-down to discuss a truce, a potential resolution to the conflict. Bianca was wary, suspicious of Donati's motives. She knew that he was a ruthless, cunning man, not to be trusted. But she also realized that the conflict had reached a stalemate, that neither side could achieve a decisive victory without incurring unacceptable losses. She agreed to the meeting, but she insisted on a neutral location, a place where she could ensure her own safety and the safety of her allies. She chose the old Romano villa, the scene of so much pain and betrayal, the place where the truth had been revealed, where the past had been laid to rest. The meeting was tense, the atmosphere charged with animosity and suspicion. Don Carlo Donati, flanked by his sons and his advisors, faced Bianca, Antonio, Sophia, and Riccardo Bellini, who had insisted on being present, his loyalty still a question mark, but his presence undeniably powerful. Lorenzo was conspicuously absent. "Where is your brother?" Donati sneered, his eyes fixed on Bianca. "Lorenzo is attending to other matters," Bianca replied, her voice steady, betraying none of the alarm she felt at his absence. The negotiations were fraught with difficulty, filled with veiled threats and subtle power plays. Don Carlo demanded significant concessions, territorial rights, a share of the Marchesi businesses, a recognition of his dominance. Bianca refused to yield, countering his demands with her own, insisting on a lasting peace, a mutual respect, a commitment to avoiding future conflicts. She spoke with a strength, a conviction, a determination that surprised even Donati. As the negotiations reached an impasse, a sudden commotion erupted outside the villa. Gunshots, shouts, the sounds of a struggle. Lorenzo. He burst into the ballroom, his clothes torn, his face covered in blood, his eyes wild with a mixture of rage and something else. Something that resembled desperation. "They betrayed us," he shouted, his voice hoarse. "The Donatis, they planned to ambush us. They were never going to negotiate." He had discovered, he explained, that Don Carlo had arranged for a second team of assassins to attack the villa, to eliminate Bianca and her allies, to seize control of the Marchesi family once and for all. Lorenzo, acting on instinct, had intercepted the assassins, fighting them off, preventing them from carrying out their plan. He had saved Bianca's life, again. But at what cost? He collapsed to the floor, his body weakened by his injuries, his spirit broken by the constant cycle of violence and betrayal. Bianca rushed to his side, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. She had misjudged him, doubted him, feared him. But he had proven his loyalty, his love for his family, in the most profound way possible. His eyes met hers. I did it for you, Bianca," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "For the family. For a new legacy." Those were his last words. Lorenzo, the volatile, unpredictable younger brother, the man who had lived in Marco's shadow, had finally found his own redemption, sacrificing his life to save the family he had once resented. His legacy was redefined, not by ambition or violence, but by an act of selfless courage. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of destruction, but also a glimmer of hope for a new beginning. Chapter 20. The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties. Lorenzo's death was a devastating blow, a profound loss that shook Bianca to her core. She had lost a brother, a flawed but ultimately loyal member of her family, a man who had sacrificed his life to save hers. The immediate threat, however, remained. Don Carlo Donati, seeing his ambush foiled, his plans shattered, was enraged. He knew that he had lost the advantage, that he was facing a united front, a force that was stronger and more determined than ever before. "You will pay for this, Marchesi," he shouted, his voice filled with venom. "You and your entire family will pay." He lunged at Bianca, his hand reaching for a hidden weapon. But before he could strike, Antonio intervened, his movements swift and decisive. He disarmed Donati, his grip like iron, his eyes filled with a cold fury. "Enough," Antonio said, his voice low and dangerous. "The killing ends here." He could have killed Donati, ended the threat once and for all. But he didn't. He had made a vow to Bianca, a vow to build a different future, a future free from unnecessary violence. Instead, he ordered Donati and his men to be disarmed and detained. He would hand them over to the authorities, let the law deal with them, rather than resorting to the brutal justice of the Mafia world. It was a risky move, a departure from the traditional methods of the Famiglia. But it was a statement, a declaration of Bianca's vision for a new legacy, a legacy based on justice, on fairness, on a commitment to breaking the cycle of violence. The remaining members of the rival coalition, seeing their leader captured, their plans foiled, quickly surrendered. The storm had passed, leaving behind a trail of destruction, but also a glimmer of hope for a new beginning. Bianca, exhausted but resolute, addressed the assembled families, her voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "This conflict has cost us all dearly," she said. "We have lost loved ones, we have suffered losses, we have endured pain and hardship, but we have also shown our strength, our resilience, our determination to survive." She spoke of her vision for a different future, a future where the families of Naples could coexist peacefully, where disputes could be resolved through negotiation and compromise, where violence was a last resort, not a first response. She proposed a new alliance, a council of families, where representatives from each famiglia could meet, discuss their concerns, and resolve their differences peacefully. She offered a chance for a new beginning, a chance to break free from the endless cycle of betrayal and bloodshed. Her words were met with a mixture of skepticism and cautious optimism. The families of Naples were wary, accustomed to the brutal realities of their world. But they were also tired of the constant conflict, the endless violence, the perpetual state of fear. One by one, the leaders of their rival families stepped forward, pledging their support for Bianca's vision, agreeing to join the new alliance, to work together to build a more peaceful and prosperous future for Naples. Even Riccardo Bellini, the enigmatic shadow, offered his allegiance, his voice low and steady. "I believe in your vision, Bianca," he said. "I will stand by you." The final confrontation of hearts and loyalties had ended, not in bloodshed, but in a tentative, fragile peace. Bianca had achieved the impossible, uniting the warring families of Naples, forging a new alliance, redefining the legacy of the Marchesi family. She had done it, not through violence and intimidation, but through strength, through diplomacy, through an unwavering commitment to her vision for a different future. She had faced her demons, overcome her doubts, and emerged as a true leader, a capo who was both feared and respected. As she stood in the old Romano villa, the scene of so much pain and betrayal, surrounded by her allies, her family, her husband in all but name, she felt a sense of profound accomplishment, a sense of peace, a sense of hope. The storm had passed, and the dawn of a new era had begun. The future remained uncertain, the challenges ahead were daunting, but Bianca Marchesi, the widow who had become a warrior, the lioness who had protected her pride, was ready to face whatever came next. She looked at Antonio, a silent understanding passing between them. The fight had been won, but the war, the real war, for their future, was just beginning.
Epilogue.
Years passed. The scars of the past remained, etched into the fabric of Naples, woven into the lives of its people.
But the city had changed.
The constant cycle of violence and betrayal had diminished, replaced by a fragile but enduring peace. The Council of Families, Bianca's brainchild, had become a powerful force for stability and cooperation. Disputes were still common, rivalries still simmered, but they were resolved through negotiation, through compromise, through a shared commitment to avoiding the bloodshed of the past. Bianca and Antonio, finally able to publicly acknowledge their love, were married in a small, private ceremony, surrounded by their closest friends and allies. They had built a life together, a life filled with love, with respect, with a shared purpose. They ruled the Marchesi family together, not as dictator and consort, but as partners, equals, sharing the responsibilities of leadership, guiding their family towards a more prosperous and peaceful future. Riccardo Bellini remained a close advisor, his loyalty unwavering, his skills invaluable. He had found a place within the Marchesi family, a sense of belonging, a purpose that transcended his own personal ambitions. Sofia Romano, having finally found closure, having avenged her family's honor, chose a different path. She left Naples, seeking a new life, a life free from the shadows of the past. But she remained a close friend and ally to Bianca and Antonio, a reminder of the shared pain they had endured, the shared victory they had achieved. The Marchesi Palazzo, once a symbol of power and fear, became a center of community, a place of refuge, a symbol of hope. Bianca opened its doors to the people of Naples, hosting events, supporting charities, fostering a sense of unity and belonging. She never forgot the lessons of the past, the sacrifices that had been made, the cost of redemption. She ruled with a firm hand, but also with compassion, with understanding, with a deep commitment to justice and fairness. One evening, as Bianca and Antonio stood on the balcony of the palazzo, overlooking the city of Naples, the lights twinkling below, the sounds of laughter and music drifting up from the streets, they reflected on their journey, on the transformation they had witnessed, on the legacy they had built. "We did it, Antonio," Bianca said, her voice filled with a quiet sense of accomplishment. "We broke the cycle." Antonio smiled, his eyes filled with love and admiration. "We did it together, Bella mia," he replied. "And we'll continue to do it, together, for as long as we live." They embraced, their love a beacon of hope in a city that had once been consumed by darkness. The widow's war was over, and a new era had begun, an era of peace, of prosperity, of a legacy redefined. The city below them hummed with life, a testament to the enduring power of hope, of resilience, of the human spirit. And as they stood there, silhouetted against the night sky, they knew that their journey was far from over, but that together, they could face whatever challenges the future might hold. The peace was fragile, yes, but it was real. And it was theirs. They held each other close, and the night embraced them in return.